So, Nate, it has come to my attention, and I have been all over Twitter to make sure this is accurate and all over stuff to make sure that this is an actual thing and it's not just rumors. The NFL, it's pretty much official. The NFL is looking to expand the regular season to 18 games. Now, we had very recently in this past couple years where we've had a 17 game expansion. It was 16, now it's 17, and now it's going to be 18. Well, let's talk about some of the pros and cons. I personally think it's mostly problems with expanding it, but how do we fix these problems? So we're going to dissect it just a little bit to kind of problem number one, and it'll go to increasingly more problematic as we get to the end of the list. So we have, in my mind, there has to be a 20-week system in place. And you're like, Connor, there's already 18. Where do you get 2 more weeks from? Okay, so if you add a game, that adds to 19 weeks. And then if you add another bye week, then that is 20 weeks.
Perfect.
In my mind, you have to have 2 bye weeks because that not only decreases injury, which you have just now increased because of you adding another game, but it gives them more time to rest and prepare for the oncoming weeks and the heavy season that they have in front of them. So what do we think about 20 weeks in a regular season?
Again, pros and cons. The body, how much can the body take? The body and the mind at that. 20 weeks, that's a lot of football. That means you're going to give something, you got to give up something. That means you're going to have to cut back on a preseason game. And then preseason games, that helps big time with the evaluation process of later round guys and undrafted free agents. So that the guys make the team, because of these preseason games and whatnot. Also got to take into consideration now, adding another game, we need to go ahead and look at the possibility of guaranteed contracts for all players in the NFL. Because again, this is a bang bang. It's a violent collision that happens every play and whatnot. And you want to make sure guys are well compensated because they're out there putting their bodies on the line. Now you get these sayings and this pushback from individuals saying, well, this is their job and whatnot. Yes, this is a part of the job. It's a blissful job. Let's not mince words, making big dollars, doing something you love. Really, it's just fun. At that same time, we gotta look at the bigger picture, and further down the line that a lot of these guys or whatnot, they're putting their bodies out there on the line. As you get older, those knees, those hips, they become a problem. So we got to make sure we put, things into play and structure where if you're going to add another game and you want a 20-week season and whatnot, you got to make these contracts guaranteed. And we got to, the player revenue, the player owner revenue share, it needs to favor more in the players because don't get me wrong, we love the owners and what it is that they're doing, but the players are out there, putting their bodies on the line every week. So there's a lot of things you got to take into consideration. And then you got to also ask yourself the evaluation process with a lot of these teams. Are we really willing to really basically ultimately change the evaluating process when it comes to evaluating talent just to get another game? Because right now we're at 17 games, three preseason games, if I'm not mistaken. If we go 18 games, it'll ultimately be 2 regular season games. That's a lot of football. That's a lot of football. That's a lot of wear and tear on the body and on the mind because, again, you have to watch a lot of film. It's a lot that goes into, your craft and whatnot. So these are things that, you got to take into consideration. I mean, the bigger picture, of course, is the revenue and making money. I mean, again, yet health is also a big picture and big factor, in this whole thing. So it's going to be interesting.
Well, I want to target 2 things that you brought up: preseason and guaranteed contracts. Mm-hmm. So let me cover the preseason aspect of it because of my kind of experience with watching the Saints in these past several years of me being a Saints fan. They are notorious for having undrafted free agents as their starters. Mm-hmm. We've seen somebody like Rashid Shaheed this past year who just won I can't remember if he won All-Pro, but he was in the Pro Bowl for a returner. He was an undrafted free agent. We see several guys on this New Orleans roster, and it's partly because of the cap hit. They have no cap space to pay players, so they have to take undrafted free agents and put them on the team. But what this does, say Rashid Shaheed doesn't really shine until that third preseason game, you would never know because now we have 2 preseason games instead of 3. So, yeah. Mickey Loomis jail. Yeah, exactly. I would love that. So now we have these someone's knocking on my door. I hope that's not important because I'm on the podcast. I don't care. Now we have 2 preseason games. Ruins the chance of kind of having somebody like Rashid Shaheed if they don't stand out until the 3rd week. And then whatnot. I'm going to answer this, Nate. You talk about the preseason, then we'll talk about guaranteed contracts. I don't know what this is.
All right. But of course, okay, when we talk about the preseason, now before when I was playing, it was 4 games. Again, and that gave you a way to really evaluate talent, but also get your team ready for the regular season. So the first preseason game, if I'm not mistaken, the offense and the defense, the ones play probably a quarter or a series and a half and whatnot. Now, the second preseason game, the offense plays the first half. The offense and defense, the ones play the first half. Now, the third preseason game, that's the dress-up game, where the offense and the defense, the starters respectively play up until like the third quarter. Now I'm going over the preseason from when I was playing and whatnot.
Okay.
So that fourth preseason game was the preseason game where the starters, they just dress, but it's all the on the fringe guys, the guys that are on the fringe of making a team and whatnot. You want to get more film, you want to get more, time to evaluate and see how they do in in-game situations. Now, if we're talking about an 18-game season, now we talk about 17 game. Let me start at the beginning. We started a 17-game season. Now we took that preseason game away. We took one of them away, and
which made it a little less problematic.
Problematic. But if we take away the next one, making it only 2 games, because we want to add another regular season game, that cuts big time into the evaluation process. Now, could it work? It could work. Yet, this is where you're going to run into problems. You're giving your offensive and your defensive starters really 1 week to get into game mode and get into that energy, get into that fluidness of in-game. That would probably be the first one. But you also got to be careful because this is the NFL. One bad slip, a person's season can end. So you got to be very, very, very conscious and cognizant of that area. Now, then you're going to go ahead and put the evaluation process really to test, because again, you're not going to be able to have that much footage and film on players. Now, given you have practice footage, but you need in-game situation footage. That's where the evaluation process really, that's the fun part right there, is to see a player in-game and see how they react. See if they're studying their playbook and just, again, knowing tendencies and whatnot and so forth. That's where the evaluation process takes a huge hit if you add another game into the season.
Okay, and I like that. We're on the same page with that right there, but you brought something that was up that was kind of eye-opening for me that I didn't look at earlier. You talked about guaranteed contracts, and you're looking at it in favor of the players.
Oh, yes, most definitely. I'm always going to look for it.
Yes. But the way I see it and the way which will probably work out, having 18 games is not in favor of these players and their injury risk and all that stuff. It's favor of fans and money, the way I see it. Now, with that taken into consideration, we have now increased injury, which brought me to my next point. But because injury is increased, that means teams are not going to guarantee as much money as they would, because why would I pay somebody who was injured? If you have a higher chance to get injured, you are not going to have as much guaranteed money in a contract as you would with less games, because it's a business at the end of the day. Football is a business. If you are going to sit here and say, okay, I have 18 regular season games. Mm-hmm. You have been injured when it was 16, you missed half of the season. Well, how many games are you really going to miss now with 18? where is going to be your production if I guarantee you this amount of money? So in my mind, the guaranteed amount of money in a contract will get lower and lower and lower if they keep increasing injury risk.
But then that's where it comes in. It's going to be very, very key for when I don't know when the talks for the new CBA are supposed to take place and take precedent. But now you got to take that into consideration where, again, if you want to add a game, you got to, you in order for you to give, you got to give and you got to give. You can't just get everything. You got to give up a little bit. You know what I'm saying? It's a give take relationship. Hey, you want another game? You want the players to give you another game? Okay, you have to give up something. And the likes of those guaranteed contracts and whatnot for players. And a lot of this is predicated on a lot of the younger, like, undrafted lower round guys and so forth. Because again, these guys, again, they don't have the guarantees that a first and a second rounder has or an established veteran. You got to look out for these guys and whatnot, because again, they're busting their tails every day at practice, on special teams, on Sundays, Mondays, and on Thursdays. They're trying to be the best they can be and live out a dream. So, you've got to meet them halfway with the whole thing. So again, it's a lot to talk about, 18-game season, but you're looking at it. Yeah, again, it's more for the fans and more revenue. Again, more revenue means you're making more money. So in that case, why not guarantee, these contracts for these players that's out there putting their bodies on the line every week?
And realistically, they should. That's how it should be. But because of the business aspect of sports nowadays and the political aspect of everything, they're not going to do, in my mind, they might, because of how strong the players' influences are in the game. I mean, you take LeBron James, for example, in the NBA. The man's basically the commissioner of the NBA at this point. What LeBron says goes, right? And which I mean, it brings me to my next point. Because injury has increased and because the game is now that much more strenuous, we have to increase roster size. We cannot have a 53-man roster anymore.
Most definitely.
We have to have depth so that, therefore, when the time comes at the end of the season, you want to sit starters out to prepare for the playoffs, or you just want to sit starters out so that they won't get injured. You have to have people to get put in that position, because the Ravens had about 3 or 4 running backs injured. They had about 7 running backs on the roster this year because they just kept getting injured.
Cleveland Browns lost 5 quarterbacks. They went through 5 of them.
See, and the only way to fix something like that is not the only way, but because we are limited to this many options, we have to increase that roster size. We need depth.
Got a point.
So do we have a number? So if we can't have 53, what is a kind of a number in the realm of satisfaction that we can say, hey, I'm thinking around 58, maybe
60,
or maybe 60. I mean, make it a nice even number. 60 looks 60, great.
Even number.
Jack says 60.
I'm thinking 60.
I mean, 60 looks good on paper. It's easier for teams to be like, hey, we got 100 players. We got to get rid of 40 of them. Easier for the math, right? So with math, we have to now calculate where we want certain deadlines to be. So previously, we had the trade deadline at week 8. And so once week 8 passes, you can no longer trade any players whatsoever. It's done. But
that has to be moved back to at least week 10.
It has to be moved back. And we're saying at least week 10?
Week 10 or 11.
Yes. I'm thinking maybe even push it back farther, because you have now increased your roster size. So now there are more parts to a chessboard that you have to take into consideration. You have to have, you have to look at the knights, you have to look at the rooks and all the other pieces on the chessboard. And now you have just added 7 more players to your roster, which means that there are so many more different combinations to trade people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think even push it back to week 12. And Jack says 13 or 14. 10 at least. But because you have that increased roster size, it's got to be pushed back.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to.
Mm-hmm. You're right. You're
And
right.
so I mean, think about it. Think about it. If I am adding 7 more people to my team, how many different combinations of trades can I make with just that extra 7 people?
Oh man, you make a lot of combinations.
Yes. And that makes the math. I'm a big number guy. I do
Yeah, me
numbers
too.
for my
Me
job.
too.
I do accounting for my job. So I'm a big numbers guy. And even with stats in the NFL, I love my numbers. But it's got to be pushed back. I mean, you say, okay, you add 2 weeks to the season because you're giving and taking. You got to add at least 2 weeks to the trade deadline. And in my mind, even more. You have an 18 weeks. Week 12 is 2/3. So 12 would make sense. Yes. But does 12 give us enough time to take in those 7 extra players into consideration? A lot of people are saying 61 players. A lot of people are saying 61 players. And
That
I've even read where people say we don't need to have Monday Night Football at all anymore. Monday Night Football needs to be erased.
it'd be hard to do that because Monday the viewership is so high because it's the only thing that you can watch on TV. People want to watch football. That's the viewership is so high. Then on top of that, you look primetime games like on Monday night, Thursday night, and you put it a rivalry game where it's so competitive, where you got some of the biggest names in all of the sport competing against each other. The viewership, that's going to be kind of hard to get rid of. I mean, we in order to get something, you got to give up something, but that's not something that they're going to give up.
Well, Nate, how do you, in your mind, as a player who has played in the NFL, how do you decrease injury risk now that you have it so much more higher than it was before?
There's no given answer for that question, um, because injuries happen. You can get injured stepping out of the bed. Every in the morning. That you can't limit injuries from happening because this is the part of the game. This is the nature of the sport. Any and all professional and all competitive sports, injuries are part of it. I think one of the things you have to take into consideration is the practice time because and the practice time has changed drastically. From my rookie year up until I was year 4 years in. The practice time changed where it's like you can only be out practice for a certain amount of time. With the new CBA and so forth. Training camp was different. See, I did 2-a-days. I was the last draft class in 2009 to do an actual real life 2-a-day. Now it's more so less, walkthroughs and watching a lot of film and preserving your body. And there's a pro and con of that because, again, I love 2-a-days, to be honest with you, because after that second practice, you're done for the rest of the day. Like you could go to your room, sleep for the whole next day. That's the reality of it. Again, it new CBA, new things where you want to preserve bodies and soft tissue and all that stuff and whatnot. Those hamstring pulls, those ankle injuries, those season enders with the ACL and Achilles, with all of the physicalness of the practicing and whatnot. Now, guys, you got to watch a lot more film, but you're taking away from the relationship that the quarterback builds with his receivers and with the offense, the camaraderie and the chemistry. You know, Again, it's give and take. To be honest with you, it's give and take, and in order for you to get something, you're going to have to give up something. So it's hard.
I think the only reason that they have changed from what you had in the NFL, it doesn't have to do with injury. I think and even in 10, 15 years since you've played, Nate, I think it's simply because of how the game has evolved. People are getting smarter. People are getting stronger. People are getting better at football. I mean, we've seen it in other sports too. The NBA, this is the highest scoring offense in like from when the Warriors won it back in like 16, the average score points a game for an offense has increased so much more than it did back then. And we're seeing it in the NFL.
But to see that
Everything's
thing,
getting better.
but okay, I wouldn't necessarily say better because I'm on the defensive side.
Yeah, better.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
The
a
pretty
loose term.
yeah the pretty boys are on offense. You know, what we have to take into consideration is the game is for entertainment. You know, again, at the end of the day, it's still entertainment. People want to see points and whatnot. Now, the competitiveness in me is that you want to see guys out there competing and just you don't want them to just give the game to the offense. Um, Again, you can't play. It's like playing defense. People are so. I don't want to say this, but I'm gonna say it. People are so soft now. You know, they're so. You got a lot of prima donnas and in all sports where it's like you get toughness by playing defense, by going out there and being physical. And if this is something you love, I want you to beat me. I want you to beat me. You're a game I respect by beating me. I don't want nothing to be given to me. Now, you see all of these points and whatnot because people are amazed. It's entertaining to see long touchdowns. The people don't want to see defensive struggle games that I'm used to and games that I love because that's the actual chess match. It's again who's going to again make the play in itself to give his team the advantage and whatnot. A lot of people now, you can't touch receivers. You can't hit quarterbacks. You can't touch. The game has changed in itself. Yet people are saying that it's making the game safer, but in turn, it's making the game softer because again, you get receivers that go across the middle, take one big shot, take a shot, a clean shot. They're looking for a flag and whatnot. So in turn, what it is limiting the defensive players, and it's also giving the offensive players just a leg up. That's not competition. Competition it has to be an even playing field where if you want to win, you got to beat me. You got to run through me, and you can't just look to the referees. Excuse me, because no, I'm going into that profession. I'm crossing over. You can't look to the referees to always try to bail you out. That's not true competition. And you look in the NBA. The NBA is the same way. We're talking about scoring points. We're talking about scoring points and whatnot. The game is always going to change because of the athletes in itself. That's the game. That's the evolution of sports in all facets. Yet we're losing the texture and taste of the game, the competitiveness of the game, because you're limiting players from out there playing hard. Players are more so less nervous about going out there playing hard because you don't want to get fined. And you don't want to be a repeat offender when it comes to fines. So that's the give and take.
And you're absolutely right. I used the term better earlier because obviously I would love to go back to when the Saints won the Super Bowl when you played, Nate. I'd love to have that again. And we've talked about players like Kareem Jackson and Ron Curse and how they are on the field because they play like it's 2010 again. I mean, Kareem Jackson's what, 36 years old, Nate?
Mm-hmm.
Y'all the same age. And he's still playing. And I mean, now you're retired, happy, and a family man. But he's still out there banging people's heads in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just something that he has not changed with the game that has changed right in front of his eyes. He is still the same player
Yeah.
that he was 10 years ago.
And see, I'm completely different. I don't have to go out there and try to bang anybody or do anything crazy to anybody. I like pulling my kids in wagons. What I got to worry about, I don't got to worry about a receiver coming down and blindside blocking me in the box. I got to worry about stepping on the car in the middle of the night, going to the bathroom. I got to worry about stuff like that.